In this video, we'll look at selecting things with the Magnetic Lasso Tool. We'll look at changing the brush mode, changing it specifically to hue, H-U-E, and adjusting layers, specifically in this tutorial, adjusting layers to black and white. The primary tool that we'll look at in this tutorial is the Magnetic Lasso Tool, and that can be found over here. It's generally, depending on the version of Photoshop, the third tool down, and you can right click and you can see there are three lasso tools. By right clicking, the one we're going to look at is the Magnetic Lasso Tool, and it kind of looks like a triangle lasso with a magnet in it. Before I do anything with that, I'm going to zoom in on this bowl of apples, and this bowl of apples is actually called Apple Dish. The file name can be found on your desktop in the graphics folder, in the fruit folder that's inside of that, and it's called Apple's Dish. So the Magnetic Lasso Tool allows us to highlight things, and it does a lot of the work for us. So what magnetic means is Photoshop is able to act like a magnet and sense the area or the border of images and highlight them to a certain degree without a whole lot of effort by us, the user. So I'm going to go over here to this apple, and I'm going to click down my left mouse button once, and you can see a little square, and I'll refer to that square from here on out as an anchor is dropped. And if I just move around this apple, you can see that this Magnetic Lasso Tool is going right around it. I'm literally just going slowly around the apple, and about every quarter inch or so it drops one of those squares and anchor. Now when I get back to the other side here, I want to click on where I originally started, and you'll see what I'll call from here on out dancing ants. It's like a highlighted line around the apple. That means that the apple's been highlighted and is active, and the only thing that'll be affected now is this apple. For instance, if I were to go over to my paintbrush, choose the color red, and maybe make my brush size a little larger, and I start painting, the only thing that's affected, notice, is that. Alright, so I'm going to go to Edit, step backward twice, and then if I ever want to get rid of something that's selected, not only when I use this tool but any tool, I can go to Select and choose Deselect. Okay, I'm going to use the Magnetic Lasso Tool again, and I'm going to highlight this apple. As I go around it, you can see again the anchors are being dropped every so often. But what I can also do is drop anchors on my own, particularly when I get in a tight spot where Photoshop isn't doing a good job of being a magnet, so to speak. And one spot where that can get kind of hairy here, it's around this stem of this next apple. So I'm just going to left click every so often. You can see me adding anchors on my own. So these are anchors I'm adding on my own. I'll add one down here and I'll go around. Now, it's recommended, or I recommend, you drop anchors on your own, literally just by clicking the mouse, the left button. The more anchors you can add, the more detail you're going to be able to get when you're going around an object. So don't just rely on Photoshop to add anchors. You can add them on your own by left clicking. I'm going to finish this outline or selection by clicking on where I started. You may need to do that a couple times, and you'll notice that apple is selected. If I ever want to highlight two things, I need to hold the Shift key down, and I want you to take a look at the Magnetic Lasso. When I hold the Shift key down, you can notice a little plus sign. I'll let go. A little plus sign appears next to it. Now I can go to some other apple or some other object in my picture and start highlighting again. You'll notice that my plus is still there. I've actually let go of the Shift key, and I'm able to highlight multiple things that aren't next to each other. So you'll see that's highlighted. And now if I wanted to highlight, well, the rest of them are connected. Now let's see, if I wanted to highlight this one, I would hold my Shift key down. You'll see the plus sign show up, and then you can go around that apple. So as I come around here, I'm going to drop some anchors on my own. Particularly, you want to drop your own anchors when the picture gets difficult to see and Photoshop might not pick up on it. So you can see me dropping my own anchors, and there I have them all highlighted. Now if I were to click on my paintbrush and just choose the color red, which I'll do, you can see I have these three things highlighted. I can color them in, and notice nothing else is affected but the things that are highlighted. I'll go to Edit, Step Backward. And the next thing I'm going to look at is the mode of the paintbrush. So I'm going to keep the color red. I'm on the paintbrush. My brush tip is pretty big, but that's okay. I'm going to click on the mode of the paintbrush and go all the way down to where it says Hue. By changing the brush to hue, I'm going to still use the color red, but it's going to change the way the red affects the apple. So you can see here, when I go over top of this now, it won't change it to red. It will just change the transparency and the color of the apple that way. So I could make my brush size smaller and go over here and do the same thing. Now if I ever want to get rid of something that's selected, I can go to Edit, and I can go to, I can go to Select and go to Deselect, and everything that was highlighted will be unhighlighted. If I go to Edit, Step Backward, I can bring that back. So I'm going to go to Select, Deselect, and next thing I'm going to look at is how to fix errors when I'm highlighting something if I get off track. Let's say I wanted to highlight this apple and I start and I accidentally go out here because my mouse got shaken or I wasn't paying attention. I can hit the backspace key, and as long as I follow it with my mouse, I can go backwards. So I'll do that again. If I started here and I accidentally went up in here somewhere, in order to move back anchor at a time, I can hit the backspace key, and as long as I follow it with my mouse, it'll work. If I start highlighting something, another way to undo something, if I start highlighting something I just don't like the way that looks, I can hit the escape key, the top leftmost key on the keyboard, and get rid of it to start over. So there are three ways to unselect something. Here they are again. If I start selecting something and I go off track a little bit, I can hit the backspace, and as long as I follow the anchors with my mouse, it'll go back to the next anchor. If I start highlighting something and I don't like it, I can hit the escape key and get rid of it altogether. If I have something highlighted and I want to get rid of it after it's already highlighted, I can go to Select and Deselect. Alright. Lastly, let's look at how to adjust layers, particularly specifically to black and white. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to highlight this apple in the center, and I'm dropping my own anchors here. And now that's active. So that's active. The only thing that will be affected from anything I do, remember if I took my paintbrush out here, and I take my mode back to normal and start to paint, the only thing that's affected is what is selected. So in this case, I want to look at something new, and the last idea in this tutorial is how to adjust layers to black and white. I'll click on this, Create New Fill or Adjustment. It looks like a little moon or a little piece of a pie down here that's half black and half white. I'll click on that, and I'll go to black and white, and you'll notice the apple that was selected turned to black and white. I'm going to Edit, Step Backward. Let's say I wanted to keep that apple green and I wanted everything else to turn to black and white. I would go to Select and choose Inverse. By choosing Inverse, what I've just done is taken what I had selected, and when I choose Inverse, Photoshop will select everything but that. So now watch what happens when I go to black and white. Everything but that apple turns to black and white. So let me do that again. Okay. In order to get rid of that highlight, I'll go to Select, Deselect. Now nothing is highlighted. Let me get my Magnetic Lasso and we'll review. If I want to highlight something, I can drag the Magnetic Lasso around the item, and I have to touch it back to where I started to get the dancing ants or the selection around it. By holding the Shift key, I can go somewhere completely different in an image and start selecting something else. And I've just selected this second apple. I have to connect where I started. Now I have two things selected. So that's how to select multiple things. If I wanted to unselect them, remember I can go to Select and Deselect. Let's say I wanted to turn those two apples to black and white. I go down here to my adjustment layers. It looks like the circle that's half black, half white. I'll click on it and go choose black and white. Now notice that makes those two apples that were selected black and white. Let me go to Edit, Step Backward, and take this one step further. Let's say I want to keep those apples in color, and I want to make the rest of this black and white. I would go to Select and Inverse. Inverse will take the two apples I had selected and reverse the selection, making everything else black and white. You can see the dancing answer now going around the whole picture. Now I can go down to black and white, and I've changed the color of everything except what I had highlighted. So in this video we looked with the Magnetic Lasso Tool. We looked at changing the paintbrush mode to hue and adjusting layers to black and white.